Well, great. It's good to see so many people today. I'm Peter Rice. I'm one of the co-organizers of this symposium, along with Heather Koop and Rob Vanette from the MITPPC. And I'm going to be organizing and emceeing the show this morning. I'm so glad to see so many people here gathered for the symposium. I'd like to thank you all for coming and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. But I'd also like to acknowledge the speakers who will be introduced prior to each of their talks this morning, and also the sponsors, which include the Minnesota Invasive Plant and Pest Center, the Institute on the Environment, the Stackman Borlaug Center, the CFANS Genes Council, all located here at the U of M, and the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, which is headquartered in Mankato, and which represents and works for soybean producers across Minnesota. Now, before we get started, I'd like to take maybe 45 seconds for us to focus on why we're all in this room today. And I think it's a safe bet to say that we're all here because of one or more of the following reasons. We either worry about buckthorn creating dense thickets that suppress native diversity and constrain the regeneration of future forests, or we think those buckthorn thickets are an ugly blotch on the beauty of our native landscape, or we worry about the impacts of buckthorn on agricultural productivity because of its role as an overwintering host of soybean aphids or oat crown rust, or all of those. And I guarantee that each of us will learn something this morning about more than one of those different topics. And equally important, hopefully we can use this event to catalyze continuing dialogue about both standard and new out-of-the-box approaches to dealing with this pest. And with that, I'd like to get us going by introducing Joe Smentek of the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, who provides some opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. As Peter mentioned, I'm Joe Smentek. I'm an environmental attorney on staff with Minnesota Soybean. Minnesota Soybean is kind of an umbrella for two different organizations, the Soybean Research and Promotion Council, which is the checkoff. That's the federal funds that come in based on the sale of soybeans in the state. Produces about $16 million worth of value to our organization, half of which goes to a national organization. Leaves us about $8 million to do promotional work to increase the productivity and profitability of soybeans. We're federally barred from using one single penny of that money on any type of lobbying. So the other arm is the MSGA, the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association, which is a membership of 4,000 individuals that have given up extra money on top of that checkoff to allow us to do lobbying and some of the work we do in St. Paul. I'm a city kid. I'm not a farmer. I grew up a short way away from here in Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota. I found it very interesting that the subtitle for today was Uniting Farmers and Foresters, Citizens and Scientists. At first glance, I don't really seem to fit into any one of these categories. I'm a citizen, sure, but I've taken a strange career path that led me to here today. Definitely not the career path that I thought would take me here today. When I was 6 years old, I decided I wanted to be a forester. Well, not really a forester, because when I was 6 years old, I didn't know what a forester was, but I wanted to be a park ranger. More specifically, I wanted to be the park ranger that found Smokey the Bear. Basically, I wanted to be Smokey the Bear. This led me to high school to work with the Youth Conservation Corps here at the Minnesota River Valley National Wildlife Refuge. This is where I first encountered buckthorn as an environmental problem. I didn't really know about it before that, but we did a variety of work in the summer of 1993 on the refuge. We picked up trash from the Mall of America that was floating down the hill. We put up signage in wetlands that nobody else wanted to do, so they sent the high school kids out to do it. We removed old barbed wire fence, we fixed flood-damaged hiking paths, and we removed a lot of buckthorn. The buckthorn days were my favorite days, days that we did work on the refuge, mostly because of the chainsaws. We also learned a lot about the buckthorn, about the environmental damage it could do, exactly what Peter mentioned about the choking out the native plants, the erosion problems that it could cause along the Minnesota River. Later, as a visitor back to the refuge, when I was attending the University of St. Thomas, I also learned that pulling and cutting down buckthorn doesn't really do much because on those same paths, all the buckthorn was back. The areas we helped clear were again infested, what I like to name the sharp pokey plant from hell. I think that's the Latin name of it. So at the University of St. Thomas, I was cured of my desire to become a forester and a biology major, all by math. Calculus, to be exact. I had to settle on being a biology minor and moving to the environmental studies just because I really hated calculus. That led me to think about now what am I going to do with my life, and I looked around and I looked really hard at which graduate school test doesn't have math on it. So the LSAT was the answer. So it was on to environmental policy I went. I went on to go to law school at Hamlin School of Law, got an advanced degree in environmental law from Pace University in White Plains, New York, both of which are now named something entirely different. Fast forwarded a bunch of years, and I had become an assistant county attorney totally by accident, prosecuting felonies, gross misdemeanors, misdemeanors, handling child support cases, serving on drug court, and covering anything I could possibly cover that had anything to do with environmental law, which was what I was really interested in Nicola County. My wife and I purchased a home in Mankato that she grew up in that sits on a beautiful lot that abuts a city park in Mankato, Rasmussen Woods. It's a very, very lovely 2.5 acres of buckthorn. The DNR website states common buckthorn was first brought to Minnesota and Europe in the mid-1800s as a very popular hedging material. Shortly after its introduction here, it was found to be quite invasive in natural areas. The nursery industry stopped selling it in the 1930s, but many buckthorn hedges may still be found in older neighborhoods throughout Minnesota. I want to add an extra sentence to that says, most particularly at 105 Edgerton Road in Mankato, Minnesota, where the residents must have lived in a Tri-Wizard Tournament-style buckthorn hedge maze. I proceeded to repeat history and pull that 2 acres of buckthorn out, with slightly better success than the wildlife refuge, thanks to constant use of a weed wrench and a lawnmower and my 3 children who I have taught to seek and destroy any buckthorn shoots that come up. So I'm going to go ahead and claim to be kind of a minor forester on that. Got a biology minor forester for that effort. So fast forward a couple more years, and I was sitting at the Nicola County office, and one day I get a call out of the blue. It's Minnesota Soybean, and they called and asked me if I was interested in helping farmers with environmental law issues. They had found out that I had this environmental degree from a couple other lawyers that I knew. He called up and asked if I was interested in helping. So I had worked at the Department of Ag as an intern in law school, and I knew a lot of issues that environmentalists get mad about, the farmers get mad about too. So I said, this might be a good thing. And I was primarily thinking about water quality, and so were they. Shortly after I was employed there, I got sent to a meeting to cover the research that we do. And it was research that was, all kinds of things. So the stuff Bob does, stuff other people here do, a lot of stuff I knew nothing about, not being a farm kid. So it was kind of boring to me, I'll admit. And I was kind of tuning out, and I was kind of looking on my phone, and then someone said buckthorn. And I said, whoa, I know buckthorn. What are these farmers talking about buckthorn for? And so I kind of, perked up, and I started listening a little bit more. And it was kind of at that moment when we were talking about the soybean aphid and its life cycle, and more people that are smarter about this will talk about more about this, Bob in the back there. And really kind of looking at that link where it kind of clicked for me, and kind of, I'm not the first person to think of this. There's a lot of people that have been working on this stuff for a lot longer. But I'm the first person that had my job. And I started to look at how our farmers were looking at invasive species. And they weren't. What they were looking at, what they were doing, is they were handing out a lot of checkoff dollars to look at how we can control these aphids once they're already in the field. What do we do when we get to a certain threshold? What do we spray? How do we control them? We weren't really looking at where the little things came from and what we could do to hit them where it would hurt the most. So, like I said, we've spent countless dollars looking at how to control aphids, when to control aphids, what to do if you don't succeed right away, kind of all of those type of research projects. We're facing issues in a lot of the agricultural fields that are out there with resistance to some of the chemicals in the soybean aphids. We also see that these chemicals obviously don't just hit the aphids. They're hitting a lot of non-targeted pests. So we also spend a lot of money on just drift and spray and how we can keep those chemicals on the aphids or on the plants and try to minimize that. At the same time, there's a lot of groups out there that are spending a lot of money to limit the ability to farmers to use these chemicals. So on the Growers Association side, we spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort trying to make it so we can still spray these chemicals. And at the end of the day, we have a plant here that's brought us all together that's the key to the aphid's life cycle and that could hopefully be the answer to everyone's problem. Now I'll let you in on a little secret about farmers. It's very shocking to some people. I know some people have to stand right now, so try not to pass out from this shocking secret. Farmers are people. They're people just like me, surprisingly like me. When I pulled that buckthorn out of my yard, I didn't use chemicals. I used a weed wrench, and it's a pain in the ass. But I did it because chemicals cost money. They hit things I don't want it to hit, and it's just not my first option. A lot of my farmers are the exact same way. If they don't have to go out into their fields, if they don't have to drive their tractor around, if they don't have to spray something, that's less time and money put into that crop. That's more time, like me, they can spend at the lake. They don't want to do this extra work. If they can find a way to control this without doing that, that's the path they want to take. So I went back to them and I talked with them about, what we're doing about invasive species. And they really said, well, those are just things in the water. And they hadn't really thought about the fact that most of the pests that they're facing are in fact invasive species. So we kind of changed a little bit, not totally. We still have to fund the research projects that we've been funding that have been giving us a lot of good answers, but we shifted a little bit. And we looked at, how can we limit the chemicals that the farmers need to use? With less inputs, they can reach greater profits. And for soybean aphids, that means hitting them in a new way. Waiting until aphids reach threshold before spraying, which is a best practice for a number of reasons, does not diminish the populations that we see year after year. We need to try something new. And in that, we saw the Center for Terrestrial Invasive Species as our answer. Now, some of our corporate sponsors don't like that, and I'm okay with that. I'm also not Pollyanna-ish on this issue. I know that Buckthorn isn't going to be now that farmers care, all of a sudden we're magically, deliciously going to eliminate this thing. I was a former prosecutor, and my wife likes to joke that I see the potential meth head in everybody. So I have a lot of skepticism on this issue. But I don't have to look far away to see states that don't have the aphid problems that we have. Iowa, for example, their farmers don't need to go out and spray for aphids because they don't have buckthorn. Farmers that I work with are very excited to be part of this process. We'd like to thank the University of Minnesota for taking steps to create the Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plants and Pests Center. We have for years heard about the aquatic invasive species problem in the state and its effect on Minnesota's $12 billion tourism industry. And we agree that it's high time the state took a look at these non-aquatic invasive species and their effect on the $75 billion agricultural industry in the state of Minnesota. I want to thank the researchers that are working on these issues, both on the agricultural side and on the forestry side. It's an issue that we're going to definitely have to come together and work on. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from John F. Kennedy, which he stated during his inaugural address when he was becoming president, looking at Vietnam, Cold War, civil rights, the space race. He gave a long litany of the problems the nation faced and said, "All of this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. I'm excited to listen to the talks of the other speakers here today. I'm sure they'll have much more informative speeches than I've had here. You probably won't get their whole resume and life story. I'm very excited about the partnership that we have with the Invasive Terrestrial Plant and Pest Center. And I'm excited about the beginning that this symposium marks and a change on how Minnesota soybean looks at invasive species. And even together, it may be impossible to eradicate buckthorn and the soybean aphid from the state, but let us begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was great. I think we did find something that buckthorn is good for finally. Who'd have thunk it? It's a way to bridge the urban-rural divide we hear so much about these days, and the metro-outstate divide we hear in Minnesota all the time about, too. So maybe there's something good. Our next speaker is Bob Cook, who's from the University of Minnesota here in the Department of Entomology, a professor there. Thanks, Bob.